won't say a word. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird. And if that mockingbird won't sing, Mama's gonna buy you a diamond ring.
Don't roll your eyes at me.
Hey everyone, I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Amanda, and welcome back to Blood and Black Lace, where we discuss what nightmares are truly made of.
Tonight, in episode 5, we are heading down to the French Quarter, New Orleans, Louisiana, y'all, to discuss the hideous and disgusting tale of torture and murder.
That's right. We're talking about the LaLaurie Mansion on 1140 Royal Street in New Orleans, Louisiana.
The LaLaurie Mansion was occupied by Marie Delphine McCarthy, more commonly known as Madame LaLaurie. Madame LaLaurie was a New Orleans socialite and serial killer who tortured and murdered her slaves in her household.
As it was normal practice back in those days, the LaLauries kept their slaves in the slave quarters. Of course, the stories vary from person to person, but Madame LaLaurie was known to have a sadistic appetite that never seemed fulfilled. That is until she inflicted some hideous form of torture on one or more of her slaves.
LaLaurie is believed to have had a massive grudge for her male slaves. She was a cruel woman who hated slaves, both men and women. But her hatred for male slaves seemed to go over the top and was evident from her various brutal treatments that she dished out to them.
New Orleans at that time had laws, unlike most of the southern states, that protected slaves from unusual cruel punishments, but the conditions at the LaLaurie Mansion were far from adequate.
On the 10th of April, 1834, a massive fire broke out inside the mansion. This fire was started in the kitchen by the cook, who had decided she could no longer endure the terrors at 1140 Royal Street. When the police arrived, they found the cook bound to the stove by her ankles. She explained that this had been a suicide attempt to avoid further torture. She also claimed that slaves had been taken to the upper rooms, never to return.
Bystanders responded to the fire and attempted to enter the slave quarters to make sure everyone had been evacuated. However, they were refused the keys by LaLaurie, so they barged past and broke down the doors to the slave quarters, where they found 7 slaves, more or less horribly scarred and mutilated. Some were suspended by the neck, and their limbs torn and stretched from one extremity to the next.
Witnesses said that they found male slaves naked and chained to the wall, with their eyes gouged out, and some with fingernails torn out from the roots. When firefighters arrived, the madame asked them to save the furnishings, saying, "Never mind about the slaves."
Others had their skin filleted, their wounds festering. Some had their ears hanging by shreds. Their lips were sewn together after animal feces had been put into their mouths.
Some had their intestines pulled out and knotted around their naked bodies like belts. Some had holes in their skulls, with wooden spoons still sticking out after being inserted into their brains. One victim was known to have her arms amputated and her skin peeled off in a circular pattern to make her look like a human caterpillar. There was another who had her limbs broken and reset at odd angles so she would resemble a crab.
There were other slaves that she kept as secret slaves for her doctor husband to practice Haitian voodoo medicine on. There were other reports that her cruelty extended to her daughters, who she would punish and whip if they tried to help the slaves in any way.
The slaves claimed that they had been imprisoned for months. One woman was found wearing an iron collar. An old woman was found with a hole in her head and too weak to walk. Upon the judge questioning Madame LaLaurie's husband, he stated, and I quote, that people should mind their business and not dictate laws and meddle in other people's affairs. Slaves were found to be whipped, spiked, and iron collars placed around their heads just to keep them restrained.
One story of cruelty involves that of a young girl. The story goes that the mistress became upset when one of her slaves, a 12-year-old girl named Leah, caught a tangle while brushing her owner's hair. The cruel woman seized a whip, and Leah ran. Leah's little legs carried her to the second floor, up through the attic, and then onto the roof of the mansion. As a neighbor looked on, Delphine LaLaurie emerged and closed in on the young girl. What happened next is a matter of speculation that is still discussed in New Orleans today. Some say Leah lost her footing. Others say the woman pushed her. A few say she jumped on purpose. All that is known for certain is that Leah tumbled from that roof of the mansion.
Witnesses saw LaLaurie burying the girl's corpse, and police were forced to fine her $300 and make her sell 9 of her slaves. Of course, they all looked the other way when she purchased them back.
When the news of the abused slaves became widely known in New Orleans, citizens of all classes and colors outraged and descended upon the mansion.
They entered the home, smashing and destroying everything in sight. First, they tore up the fine furniture that was a source of pride to the mistress. Then, they broke the dishes and pieces of art in the home. Additionally, they disemboweled her precious feather beds and threw the feathers into the street outside.
Police were informed, and the sheriff and his officers arrived on the scene, but by this time, the angry mob had left. The property had sustained major damage, with very little remaining, except a few walls.
Madame LaLaurie and her family escaped the mansion just before the mob took control of it.
The slaves were escorted to the local jails for public viewing. The New Orleans Bee reported that up to 4,000 people attended to convince themselves that such atrocities were true. Upon digging up the yard and the grounds of the LaLaurie mansion, bodies were discovered in the various decaying states, including that of Leah, the young girl we spoke of earlier.
Madame LaLaurie never faced trial for her atrocities. She fled from the angry mob, taking a train from New Orleans to Mobile, Alabama, and then later on to Paris, France. Not much is known of the rest of her life, and death from here. Some say Madame LaLaurie had died in France in a boar hunting accident, but that seems very unlikely. I mean, does the uppity Delphine seem the sort to hunt game? I don't think so.
A cracked copper plate was found in St. Louis Cemetery in New Orleans in 1924, with the words translated to English, Madame LaLaurie, born Marie Delphine McCarthy, died in Paris, December 7th, 1842, at the age of 6 dash. The last number is cut off.
However, according to the French archives of Paris, Marie Delphine McCarthy died on December 7th, 1849, at the ripe old age of 62.
Despite the plaque and the records, it was widely believed that while LaLaurie made it to Paris, she came back to New Orleans under a new name and continued her reign of terror. To this day, the body of Madame Marie Delphine LaLaurie has never been found.
I would like to take this opportunity to introduce Marie Laveau. After the show, American Horror Story Coven, many people believed that Laveau and LaLaurie worked together. While there is no evidence that Laveau and LaLaurie knew one another, it is likely that their paths crossed, given the proximity of their homes in the French Quarter. They only lived 2 blocks from one another. However, we'll be sure to cover the enchanting tale of Marie Laveau in another episode.
The LaLaurie house did not survive and was in complete ruins after 4 years. This is until 1838, when a man named Pierre Trenstour rebuilt it to the appearance that it has today. Over the following years, it was used as an all-girls public high school, a conservatory for music, an apartment building, a refuge for young delinquents, a bar, a furniture store, and a luxury apartment building.
Later on in the 19th century, it had extensions added, including a third floor and a rear building. Soon after the house was converted into an apartment building, a tenant was murdered. However, the bizarre details of the murder suggest ties to the paranormal.
When the renovation of the mansion began, the renovators discovered a number of bodies of slaves that had been buried alive under the floorboards. Those also included a baby's body. The discovery led to the conclusion that LaLaurie had buried the slaves alive as a means to torture them. The bodies were removed from the mansion thereafter.
Even spookier, during its time as an all-girls high school, the students would often be subjected to bizarre and random physical assaults. In 2007, the house was bought by actor Nicolas Cage before selling it at an auction in 2009. Nicolas Cage bought the property, thinking it would be a good place to write an American horror novel. He didn't get too far with the novel, obviously. Today, the house remains an iconic landmark in New Orleans with its history and mystique. I had a point, but I don't remember what the hell it was.
I'm sure you'll remember.
Every time, Brian, we get into a rhythm and Brian ruins it.
I know, right?
Every time.
Every time I get into a rhythm, you break it. You're podcast blocking.
Oh, Amanda. Okay, so we have to give a shout out to Major Messall and Gavin. Thanks, assholes. We're all trying to record, and Brian is all talking alien and AI sex and big black cocks and fucking up our whole rhythm. Actually, I blame you guys for fucking up our whole rhythm. Because he gave you his all, and then after that, the rest of the night was fucking shot to hell. So, thanks again, assholes.
Oh, one question I did have. Did Madame LaLaurie have slaves in Paris?
Her life, honestly, was very unknown.
Yeah, it's like she's off the radar before and after.
So, I have another question, Amanda. I noticed when we were recording this episode, you would say LaLaurie, and I would say LaLaurie. Do you know how it's actually pronounced? Because I know she's French, so I think it could be pronounced either way.
That depends. You could say that. I say LaLaurie. Some say LaLaurie. That's what, I mean, it's French. So, and also, I believe her name was shortened, wasn't it? Her nickname or whatever. Because her
That I didn't know. I just know that she, she was Madame Delphine. She was Madame LaLaurie.
Yeah.
She was a whole lot of names. And she got even more names after she was caught doing what she was doing.
Well, okay, so that's one of my questions. What was her life before her ownership of slaves? How did she get them? You know, she was married to a doctor, obviously, and he used his slaves to do medical experiments and blah, 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 I'm sure. But the whole thing, you know, her main focus was the male slaves. She didn't pick so much on the females. I'm curious of her life before, what drew her to that, and what drew her to the torture part of it, turning people into crabs and caterpillars. And I mean, what's with the animal deal? I have so many questions about this story.
I know she was married 2 other times before the doctor husband, and I know that the doctor was a lot younger than her. As far as where she got the slaves, I'm assuming it's because she was married into wealth. You know, because she was married to a banker before that, and before that, I believe he was in the military, but he was in the Spanish military. I did see a rumor though that said that the reason she had hatred for her male slaves was because her uncle had been killed by one of his slaves, who was a male. So maybe that, you know, transferred over into rage, that she was just taking out this anger for all male slaves onto her male slaves. I'm going to put out a poll on our Blood and Black Lace Twitter, and I want everybody's opinion. Which one should I do? Should I do the alluring story The alluring. The alluring. Should I do the creepy story?
Thank you.
What?
I said thank you.
Should I do the creepy story, Resurrection Cemetery? Or should I do the story of the infamous Bachelor's Grove Cemetery? I want to hear our audience's thoughts on that. I want to hear what they think I should do. Because they're both really good stories. And they both need to be heard. But I'm torn, and I don't want to do both of them because I feel like when you have two stories in one episode, it takes away from the actual full story of one.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get to really explore, the story itself of one place. You have to split the time in half, and I don't want to do that. I want to give justice to both of these stories. So I'm going to put out a poll, and I would like our audience to vote and see what they would like to hear in episode 7. Resurrection Cemetery, where the infamous Resurrection Mary has been seen by over 300 different accounts, or Bachelor's Grove, where there is photographic proof of ghosts sitting on gravestones.
Oh, that's a good one.
So, I'm going to put the poll out there, and we're going to let our audience decide on episode 7 what they want to hear. You're not my supervisor!
As always, friends, we're wishing you unpleasant dreams. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Lindsay, and we will catch you next time when we discuss the Barton Mansion in Redlands, California on Blood and Black Lace.